"Your sassy black lady energy is coming through," said Jimmy Kimmel sharply. Talk show tension erupts as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett calls out Jimmy Kimmel during last night's explosive interview. What started as normal late-night banter quickly turned into a viral moment that has everyone talking about respect, representation, and accountability in entertainment. The lights of the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio were extra bright last night. The audience was pumped up after a funny opening monologue about the latest political news. Jimmy was in his usual relaxed mood, sitting behind his desk with his blue note cards in hand. The crowd went wild as he announced his next guest. "Please, welcome Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas." The audience clapped and cheered as Jasmine walked onto the stage. She looked amazing in her bright yellow blazer and black pants. Her smile was big as she waved to the crowd. Jimmy stood up to greet her, and they shared a quick hug before sitting down. "Welcome to the show, Congresswoman," Jimmy said, adjusting his tie. "It's great to have you here." "Thank you for having me, Jimmy," Jasmine replied, crossing her legs and getting comfortable in the guest chair. "I've been looking forward to this." The interview started normally. They talked about Jasmine's work in Congress and some of the bills she was pushing. The audience seemed interested, clapping at all. The right moments. Jimmy nodded along, asking good questions about her career path from lawyer to politician. "So, you've become pretty famous for your passionate speeches on the House floor," Jimmy said, looking down at his note cards. "I watched some clips online, and wow, you really bring the fire," Jasmine smiled proudly. "I believe in speaking up for what's right." The conversation was going well until Jimmy decided to throw in what he thought was a joke. He leaned back in his chair and gave a little smirk to the audience. "You know, Congresswoman, I've got to say, when I watched those videos of you in Congress, I kept thinking someone needs to put a fire extinguisher next to your microphone," Jimmy said with a chuckle. "I mean, is there something in the water in Texas that makes you so explosive? Or is that just the, sassy black lady energy coming through?" The audience's reaction was mixed. Some people laughed uncomfortably, while others went completely silent. A few gasps could be heard. Jimmy seemed to realize immediately that his joke had crossed a line, but it was too late. The words were already out there. Jasmine's smile faded, but she didn't look angry. Instead, she sat up straighter and took a deep breath. The studio went quiet as everyone waited for her response. "You know, Jimmy," she began, her voice calm but firm, "I find it interesting that when white men raise their voices in Congress, they're called passionate or strong leaders. When women like me speak up with the same intensity about issues that matter, like voting rights or health care, suddenly we're explosive or sassy." She leaned forward slightly. "I'm not bringing sassy black lady energy to Congress. I'm bringing the righteous indignation of communities that have been ignored for too long. I'm bringing the voice of people whose concerns get dismissed with stereotypes instead of being addressed with respect." Jimmy's face had gone from smiling to serious. He opened his mouth to speak, but Jasmine wasn't finished. "And jokes like that reduce my professional passion to a racial stereotype. They're exactly why it's so hard for women of color to be taken seriously in spaces like Congress, or even on shows like this," she said. "So no, there's nothing in the water in Texas. There's just a lot of work to be done, and I don't have time to worry if my tone makes people uncomfortable when I'm fighting for justice." The studio was completely silent. The cameras caught Jimmy's expression, a mix of embarrassment and surprise. He clearly hadn't expected such a direct response. The audience seemed frozen, unsure whether to clap or stay quiet. After what felt like forever, Jimmy finally spoke. You're absolutely right. That was a bad joke, and I apologize. That was completely inappropriate." But the damage was done. The easy, light-hearted mood of the show had completely changed. There was a new tension in the air. "Let's take a quick break," Jimmy said, looking directly at the camera. "We'll be right back with more from Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett." As the show cut to commercial, Jimmy turned to Jasmine with the cameras still rolling but the audio muted. Their faces showed they were having a serious conversation. Some audience members later posted on social media that they could see Jimmy apologizing again, while Jasmine nodded but remained serious. When the show returned from the break, both Jimmy and Jasmine were still sitting in their places, but the mood had clearly shifted. Jimmy's usual relaxed posture was gone. He seemed stiff and careful with his words. "Welcome back," he said to the camera. "Before the break, I made a joke. That was inappropriate and disrespectful to Congresswoman Crockett. I want to publicly apologize again." Jasmine nodded. "I appreciate that, Jimmy." "Let's talk more about your work," Jimmy said, trying to get the interview back on track. "You've been very vocal about protecting voting rights. Can you tell us more about that?" Jasmine began to explain her position on voting rights, but there was still obvious tension between them. The audience seemed to be holding their breath, wondering if things would get back to normal, or if there would be more uncomfortable moments. What nobody expected was that the real drama was just beginning. As Jasmine continued talking about her legislative priorities, a production assistant ran onto the set and handed Jimmy a note. His face changed as he read it. Something was wrong. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Jimmy said, looking up from the note with a strange expression. "But we've just received some breaking news that I think you should know about, Congresswoman, and it involves you directly." Jasmine's eyebrows raised in surprise. "What are you talking about?" The audience leaned forward in their seats. The cameras zoomed in on Jimmy's face as he prepared to reveal news that would take this already tense interview to a whole new level of drama. Jimmy looked down at the note again, then back up at Jasmine. The studio lights seemed to grow hotter as everyone waited. "Someone just leaked a video online," Jimmy said, his voice unusually serious. "It shows one of your colleagues in Congress making some, well, pretty awful comments about you during a private meeting yesterday. It's already going viral." Jasmine's expression changed from surprise to something harder to read. "Which colleague?" she asked firmly. Jimmy hesitated. "Congressman Wilson from Ohio. In the video, he's telling other members that your passionate speeches are just performance art, and that you're playing the race card to get attention rather than focusing on real issues." The audience gasped. Some people booed at the mention of Wilson's comments. Jasmine took a deep breath, closing her eyes for just a moment. "And you thought this was appropriate to spring on me during a live interview?" she asked, her voice controlled, but with an edge of steel beneath it. Jimmy shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I thought you should know. It's going to be everywhere by morning. So instead of letting me find out privately, you decided to ambush me with this information on national television?" Jasmine's voice was rising slightly now. "To what end, Jimmy? For ratings? For a viral moment? For exactly the kind of drama that Wilson is accusing me of creating?" The audience was completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen in place. "That wasn't my intention," Jimmy said quickly. "I just thought—" "No, I don't think you did think," Jasmine interrupted. "First the sassy black lady comment, and now this. It feels like you're trying to create a certain narrative about me tonight." Jimmy raised his hands defensively. "Congresswoman, I apologized for the joke. That was wrong of me. But this news about Wilson, this is something people are talking about right now. Isn't it better to address it head on?" "On my terms, Jimmy. On my terms," Jasmine replied. "Not being blindsided on a comedy show." She straightened her blazer and looked directly at the camera. "But since we're here, let me be clear to everyone watching. Congressman Wilson has opposed every single bill I've put forward to help working families. He's voted against protecting voting rights, against health care expansion, against climate action." She turned back to Jimmy. "So yes, when someone consistently blocks progress that would help millions of Americans, I get passionate. I get loud. And when that same person then tries to discredit me by suggesting I'm playing some kind of race card, that says a lot more about him than it does about me." The audience erupted in applause. Jimmy tried to regain control of the interview. "I didn't mean to ambush you," he said when the clapping died down. "And for what it's worth, I think Wilson's comments were completely out of line." "Do you?" Jasmine asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because your joke earlier seemed to be playing into the same stereotype he's pushing." Jimmy's face flushed. The show's producer could be seen at the edge of the stage, making a cutting motion with her hand, a signal that they needed to go to another commercial break. "We need to take another break," Jimmy said quickly. "We'll be right back." As soon as the on-air light went off, Jimmy leaned forward. "Congresswoman, I am truly sorry. That was handled badly." Jasmine nodded but didn't respond. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. Staff members rushed onto the stage, some talking to Jimmy, others to Jasmine. The audience watched, murmuring among themselves. One audience member stood up and shouted, "You tell him, Congresswoman!" Several others clapped in agreement. The show's producer looked increasingly worried. This was not how the interview was supposed to go. She whispered something to Jimmy, who nodded grimly. When the show returned from the commercial break, Jimmy tried to steer the conversation to safer ground. "Congresswoman, let's talk about your new education initiative," he suggested with forced cheerfulness. "I understand you're working on legislation to—" "Jimmy," Jasmine interrupted, "I think we need to address what just happened. You can't drop a bomb like that and then pretend everything's normal by changing the subject." The audience murmured, in agreement. Jimmy looked trapped. "You're right," he finally admitted. "And I owe you and our viewers more than that. The truth is, I was handed that note and made a split-second decision to share it. That was wrong, and it was unfair to you." He turned to look directly at the camera. "What we should be focusing on is the important work Congresswoman Crockett is doing, not gossip or attempts to undermine her." Jasmine seemed somewhat appeased by this, but the interview had clearly gone off the rails. The easy back and forth of a typical talk show had been replaced by something much more raw and uncomfortable. "Thank you for acknowledging that," she said. "Now, if you really want to discuss my education initiative, I'm happy to do that. But I also think your viewers deserve to understand why moments like these matter so much." "Please," Jimmy said, gesturing for her to continue. "When public figures like me are constantly reduced to stereotypes or have our motives questioned," Jasmine explained, "it doesn't just hurt us personally. It sends a message to young people watching, especially young black women, that no matter how qualified they are, no matter how hard they work, they'll still face these kinds of attacks." She looked out at the audience, many of whom were nodding. "So yes, I'm passionate," she continued. "I'm loud when I need to be, because the issues I'm fighting for, education, healthcare, voting rights, they affect real people's lives, and I won't apologize for caring deeply about that work." The audience broke into applause again, louder this time. Several people stood up. Jimmy watched, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. When the clapping died down, he said, "I appreciate your honesty, Congresswoman, and you're absolutely right." But before he could continue, the stage manager frantically signaled from off stage. Jimmy looked confused for a moment, then his eyes widened. "I'm being told that Congressman Wilson is actually on the phone right now," he said. "He wants to respond to what you've said." Jasmine's eyes flashed. "You're kidding me. Are you seriously trying to turn this into some kind of political showdown?" The audience gasped at this new development. Jimmy looked genuinely surprised. "This wasn't planned," he insisted. "I had no idea he would call in." "So what are you going to do?" Jasmine asked. "Put him on the air so he can attack me while I'm sitting right here?" The tension in the studio reached a new high. Jimmy was clearly caught between a ratings opportunity and doing the right thing. The cameras captured every moment of his internal struggle. Jimmy looked at the producer, then at Jasmine, then back at the audience. You could hear a pin drop in the studio. Finally, he made his decision. "You know what? No, Jimmy said firmly, surprising everyone. "We're not doing this. Congressman Wilson can issue his response through the proper channels. This is not the time or place." The producer looked shocked. She frantically waved her hands, pointing at her earpiece, clearly getting pressure from the network executives. But Jimmy stood his ground. "Congresswoman Crockett is my guest tonight," Jimmy continued. "She deserves respect, not to be ambushed twice in one interview. That's not what this show is about." A section of the audience broke into applause. Jimmy held up his hand. "No, please," he said. "I don't deserve applause for doing the bare minimum of being decent. In fact, I owe everyone, especially the Congresswoman, an apology for how this interview has gone." Jasmine sat up straighter, clearly surprised by Jimmy's change of direction. "I started with a joke that played into harmful stereotypes," Jimmy admitted. "Then I shared private information without considering how it would affect you. I've been thinking about ratings instead of respect, and that's not okay." The studio was completely silent as Jimmy turned directly to face Jasmine. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Truly sorry. And if you want to walk off this stage right now, I wouldn't blame you one bit." For a long moment Jasmine just looked at him. The cameras caught the conflict on her face as she considered her options. "I appreciate your apology," she finally said, "but I'm not going anywhere." She adjusted her position to face both Jimmy and the audience. "Walking away is easy," she continued. "Having difficult conversations is hard. And we need more difficult conversations in this country, not fewer." Now it was the entire audience that broke into applause. Jimmy waited for them to quiet down. "You're right," he said. "So let's have that conversation. No more ambushes, no more jokes at your expense. Talk to me. Talk to all of us about the real issues." Jasmine nodded, taking a deep breath. "The real issue here isn't just about me or Congressman Wilson or even this show. It's about how we treat each other, especially in public spaces. It's about who gets to be passionate and who gets labeled as too much for showing the same emotion." She gestured around the studio. "Look at what just happened here. You made a joke based on stereotypes. I called it out. Instead of getting defensive, you listened and apologized. That's growth. That's how we move forward." Jimmy nodded slowly. "But I still messed up again with sharing that note." "Yes, you did," Jasmine agreed without hesitation. "And that points to something deeper. How quick we are to amplify conflict and drama instead of substance. Wilson's comments were designed to undermine my work by making it about my personality instead of policies. By sharing that during our interview, you played right into that strategy." "I did," Jimmy admitted. "And I'm sorry." "I know," Jasmine said, "and that's why I'm staying. Because people need to see that we can make mistakes, own them, and do better. That's how real change happens." The audience was completely engaged now, many nodding along with Jasmine's words. "So where do we go from here?" Jimmy asked. "Well, for starters, you could ask me about my education bill," Jasmine suggested with a small smile. "It's pretty important." Jimmy laughed, and some of the tension in the studio finally broke. "I would love to hear about your education bill." For the next several minutes, Jasmine explained her legislation to increase funding for public schools in underserved communities. Jimmy asked thoughtful questions. The audience listened. It was what the interview should have been from the beginning. As they wrapped up, Jimmy turned serious again. "Before we go, Congresswoman, is there anything else you want to say tonight?" Jasmine thought for a moment. "Yes. To everyone watching, especially young people who look like me, don't let anyone silence you or tell you that your passion is too much. Your voice matters. Your feelings matter. And standing up for yourself isn't playing any kind of card. It's claiming your right to exist fully as yourself." The audience erupted into the loudest applause of the night. Several people gave her a standing ovation. Even some of the crew members could be seen clapping off camera. "Thank you for staying," Jimmy said earnestly as the applause died down. I learned something important tonight, and I hope our viewers did too. So did I, Jasmine replied. Sometimes the hard conversations are the ones most worth having. As the show cut to commercial for the final time, social media was already exploding with clips from the interview. Respect Jasmine Crockett was trending, along with Yadish Real Talk with Kimmel. Behind the scenes, Jimmy and Jasmine continued their conversation off-camera. Staff members later reported that they spoke for nearly an hour after the show ended, both clearly emotional but engaged. The next morning, the interview was everywhere. News channels played clips on repeat. Opinion pieces analyzed every moment. Some criticized Jimmy for his initial joke, while others praised him for how he handled the rest of the interview. Almost everyone applauded Jasmine for her poise and powerful message. Congressman Wilson released a statement claiming his comments had been taken out of context, but few were buying it. Several of his colleagues publicly distanced themselves from his remarks. 3 days later, Jimmy addressed the viral interview at the start of his show. "By now, most of you have seen what happened when Congresswoman Crockett was here," he said to the camera. "I made mistakes, big ones, and while the Congresswoman was gracious enough to stay and finish our conversation, I want to be clear. That's not something any guest should have to do." He took a deep breath. "We're making changes to how we prepare for interviews, especially with public figures from underrepresented groups. My joke wasn't just unfunny, it was harmful and sharing." That note about her colleague was ambush journalism, not entertainment. The audience, unusually somber, nodded along. "Congresswoman Crockett showed incredible grace under pressure," Jimmy continued. "She could have walked out. Instead, she turned a difficult moment into a chance for all of us to learn something. I'm grateful for that, and I promise to do better." A week later, Jasmine appeared on a morning news show. When asked about the Jimmy Kimmel interview, she smiled. "It wasn't what I expected," she admitted. "But sometimes the most important conversations aren't the ones we plan for. Jimmy and I have spoken several times since then. He's committed to doing better, and I believe him." The host looked surprised. "So you've forgiven him?" "It's not about forgiveness," Jasmine explained. "It's about growth. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we respond to them." She paused for a moment. "The day after our interview, Jimmy called me. We talked for over an hour about representation, about stereotypes, about the extra burdens placed on women of color in public office. He listened. Really listened. That's rare, and it matters." The interview with Jimmy Kimmel had begun as a public relations disaster. It ended as something much more powerful, a genuine moment of connection and understanding that resonated with millions of viewers around the country. In the months that followed, both Jimmy and Jasmine referenced that night as a turning point, a difficult but necessary conversation that changed them both for the better. What started with a thoughtless joke became something that neither of them, nor the viewers who witnessed it, would ever forget.